Today's daf is daf lamed, and we'll start with Masiv Rava. And this is a hemshech of the story of Rav Huna. And Rav Huna says that when we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashana on Shabbos in a bezdin, it has to be in the presence of the bezdin. Masiv Rava. Rava asked the following question. We went back on Daf Chav Tes. In the Mishnah, it says, "V'od zos hoisa Yerushalayim Yisera al Yavne." Yerushalayim had an advantage over Yavne in that in the entire city of Yerushalayim, or for that matter, any city close, proximate to Yerushalayim that could see and could hear the shofar of Yerushalayim, they could come and blow the shofar on Shabbos. Yavne, it says, "Lo hayutokim el bezdin bilvad," only in bezdin. So Rava asks the following question: what does the Mishnah mean when it adds the words the od zos, implying that there's one advantage of Yerushalayim as opposed to Yavne, and now we're adding another advantage? Ilema kiriktani. If you're going to tell me that the interpretation of the Mishnah is that Yerushalayim was superseded, so to speak, Yavne, only with regard to the fact that even in the cities nearby Yerushalayim, when you blow on Rosh Hashana, Shech Aliyos B'Shabbos, then Zos Miboyle. It should have said the word Zos. Why V'od? There's some other milas, some other advantage of Yerushalayim. Therefore, we have no choice but to interpret the Mishnah in the following way. In Yerushalayim on Shabbos, every single individual will blow for himself. It will be Yavne, but however, in the city of Yavne, ain't tokim yechidim. There won't be individual blowers, but rather Shlufei Bezdin will blow on behalf of the entire community. And Ubiyavne ain't token yechidim. The ha he us Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef. The Gemara says that I can't understand what you're telling me. That you're telling me that outside of Yerushalayim ain't token yechidim. Well, what about the following? Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Amarni declared, "Ki Messiah shlicha de tzibura here b'Yavne." When the shliach of Bezdin completed blowing the shofar in Yavne on Rosh Hashana Shachal Yisrael, then lo shama inish kol une means his ears, mikol takoye dichidoi. No one could hear voices, sounds in his ears because there was such a great tumult, such a rash gadol, when the individuals would blow their shofars. So we see clearly that even in Yavne, the individuals would blow the shofars. So once again, we're back to the drawing board. Says Rava, we have to interpret the advantage of Yerushalayim over Yavne in a different way. El lav. Shouldn't we offer the following advantage of Yerushalayim over Yavne? The Yerushalayim tokim bein bizman shebezdin, bein shalom bizman bezdin. Whether or not it's during the hours, the office hours, so to speak, when bezdin is up and running and functioning, they're sitting in the chambers and they're judging until the end of the morning, until 6 hours of the day. And in Yerushalayim, we could blow the shofar even after that period of time, and the Dayanim have already gone home for the day. Whereas b'Yavne, Bizman Bezdin in, Shalom Bizman Bezdin lo. That once the Bezdin checked out, let's say midday, there was no longer a possibility of blowing the shofar on Shabbos. We didn't have Bezdin around to oversee the blowing of the shofar, and somebody might carry it. Now Rava says, "Habizman Bezdin miha Okim afilu shalom bifnei bezdin. In other words, if in Yavna was saying that once the Dayanim went home and it's no longer the Zman of Bezdin, you can't blow anymore. But if it was during the morning hours when Bezdin shows hours of Yeshiva's Bezdin, then you could blow. But there's no requirement of Bifnei Bezdin, and that's against Rav Huna, who says that in Yavna you can only blow in the presence of the Bezdin. Just to summarize, Rava is interpreting the Mishnah as saying that the advantage of Yerushalayim over Yavne is not the fact that in Yerushalayim everyone blew for himself, and in Yavne there was only one blowing for the entire community. That's not so, because we saw already from the story of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yotzei that in Yavne there was so much noise because each person was blowing his own shofar. So we go back and ask ourselves, so what is the advantage of Yerushalayim over Yavne? And the answer is, then Yerushalayim, you can blow the shofar even after Bezdin goes home, even in the afternoon hours of Rosh Hashana. Whereas in Yavne, you can only blow the shofar during the hours that Bezdin sits. But there's no indication that you need the presence of Bezdin to be there. You need the Zman when Bezdin would sit, but you don't have to blow it in the presence of Bezdin. And that's against Rav Huna. And the Gemara rejects it and says, "Lo, you should not interpret it that Yerushalayim's advantage over Yavne was that in terms of the Zman of the Tkiyos, that Yavne is limited to blowing in the morning, and Yerushalayim you can blow even in the afternoon. But rather, in terms of the place of the Tkiyos, Ilam Yerushalayim Tokim Bein B'fnei Bezdin and Shalom B'fnei Bezdin. In Yerushalayim, we don't need the presence of Bezdin in order to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. But in Yavne, it's only B'fnei Bezdin then we will blow the shofar, but Shalom B'fnei Bezdin lo. And that would reflect the Shita Rav Huna, that in Yavne, you would not blow the shofar unless the Bezdin was actually present. Now the Gemara suggests another version, another transmission of the words of Rav Huna. Ika demasni lahad Rav Huna, aha. And now we're shifting from Rosh Hashana to Yom Kippur. And they blew the shofar of the Yovel once in 50 years on Yom Kippurim. T'ksiv b'Yom Kippurim taviru shofar b'chol artzach. Melame shekol yochid v'yochid chayv l'stoa b'chol artzach. That on Yom Kippurim of Yovel, every individual member of Klal Yisrael is obligated to blow the shofar. On that, we have a comment of Rav Huna, not with regard to, as we had in the first Lishna, Rosh Hashanah, but in this Lishna Basra, with regard to the shofar of Yom Kippurim of Yovel. And on that, Rav Huna made his qualification that the im bezdin, that when the individual will fulfill his obligation on Yom Kippur of Yovel to blow the shofar, it would have to be im bezdin. That's a quote. Im bezdin. So the Gemara now analyzes. My the im bezdin. What do those words mean? Does it mean bisman bezdin? In other words, when the bezdin are sitting in the chambers ready to judge, lafuke, to the exclusion of shalom bisman bezdin. That means in the afternoon, let's say the bezdin is not available, and we don't blow the shofar then, delo. We're only going to allow you to blow the shofar on Yom Kippur Shel Yovel, bisman bezdin, masiv rova. And on this recording of the message, transmission of the ruling of Rav Huna, we have the objection of Rava, and he quotes a brayso, Tkiyas shofar b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yovel doches Hashabbos. We override the Shabbos. Now again, when we say we override the Shabbos, we're not talking about a violation of Malach of Shabbos. talking about shofar, which we said was chachma v'eina malach. Big Vulin means any city in Israel. Ish ubeso. Every individual will blow the shofar on behalf of his family. My ishu beso. What does that mean? Ishu beso. Ilema ish be'ich. If it means he's blowing the shofar on behalf of his wife, isisami mechayva, is a woman obligated in tkiyah shofar Rosh Hashana and Yovel for mitzvah saseish's mind grame. The time-bound mitzvah, and women are exempt. All mitzvah saseish's mind grame and noshim pturos. Elalam, shouldn't we therefore interpret it that he's not blowing it on behalf of his wife, but ish upeso, on behalf of the male members of his household who are obligated to hear the shofar, even when it's not a time for bezdin. So that's what it means to tkiyah shofar. Rosh Hashana v'yom l'dochas Shabbos and ishu beso. He blows it on behalf of his household, but he's not limited to the time that bezdin sits during the morning hours. And that's against Rav Huna, because Rav Huna said, Shalom Bisman Bezdin Lo. So the Gemara rejects this. Lo. The intention here, this brisa, is not to allow you to blow the shofar even Shalom Bisman Bezdin. Li'olam Bisman Bezdin. We're talking about a mitzvah of tkiyah of each person on behalf of his household, which is no heges, and only applies to Bisman Shebezdin Yoshim B'Mekomah, meaning in the morning hours. And that would support Rav Huna. Rav Sheshes objects to Rav Huna from a brisa. Shava Yovel LeRosh Hashana LeTkiyah UleBrachos. The din of Yovel is identical to the din of Rosh Hashana as far as Tkiyah shofar is concerned, and also as far as the number of brachos in the Seder of Tefillah. Elos, so what's the difference between the din of Tkiyos of Yovel and the Tkiyos of Rosh Hashanah Shchalios B'Shabbos? Shebi Yovel tokim bein bebezdin shekitshu b'os hachodesh ubein bebezdin shelo kitshu b'os hachodesh. Now, it doesn't matter whether you have the large Sanhedrin of 71 Dayanim, the Sanhedrin Agdola, which could be Makadish the Chodesh, or even if you have a smaller Bezdin, and they don't have the power, the authority to Makadish the Chodesh, nevertheless, on Yovel, we will blow the shofar. Because Yochid v'Yochid Chayav L'Skoa, and every individual is obligated in his personal responsibility to blow the shofar. Whereas, with regard to Rosh Hashanah Shechalias B'Shabbos, there was no Tekiyah unless you had a Sanhedrin Agdola that has the authority to Mekadosh the Chodesh. The Ein Kol Yochid, the Yochid Chayav L'Skoa. And there's no personal obligation to blow the shofar. This is a bezdin obligation. And which bezdin? It's got to be the Sanhedrin Agdola. So the Gemara now clarifies this price of mine. What does it mean that on Rosh Hashanah Shchalias B'Shabbos Ein Kol Yochid Yochid Chayav L'Skoa? There's no individual obligation to blow the shofar. Ilema, if you're going to tell me, to be Yovel, Tokim, Yechidim, U'Rosh Hashanah. Ein token yechidim. If you're going to tell me that on Yovel is a personal, individual obligation to blow the shofar, but on Rosh Hashanah, Shechalias B'Shabbos, the yechidim do not blow the shofar individually, but rather Shliach Bezdin will blow it on behalf of whoever's there. So the Gemara says that's impossible. Haki Asa, Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, when he came for Eretz Yisrael to Babel, Amar, he said, when the Shliach Tzibur would complete his blowing of the shofar, the Seder Atkiyos, B'Yavne, B'Rosh Hashanah B'Shabbos, Lo Shama Inish Kol Onei Mikal They called Tokaya. There was so much blowing of the individuals that you couldn't even hear the shofar. Such a rash. So we see clearly that in the case of Yovel, and in the case of Rosh Hashanah, just 1 second. So, how can you tell me that there's no individual obligation? It cannot be referring to Yovel. Because with regard to Yovel, Tokim Yechidim, and with regard to Rosh Hashanah, you want to tell me that Rosh Hashanah Chalias B'Shabbos ain't Tokim Yechidim, it's only one blowing, but we see from the case of Yavne, then on Rosh Hashanah Chalias B'Shabbos, each individual blew the shofar. So you can't tell me that only on Yovel the individual blows the shofar, but not on Rosh Hashanah. Elolav, how do we interpret this brisa if we cannot say that the extra mileage of Yovel on Rosh Hashanah is with regard to the Zman of Tekiyos? If it's with regard to who has to blow the shofar, we establish that even on Rosh Hashanah, each individual has to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah Chalias B'Shabbos. But maybe the special advantage of Yovel over Rosh Hashanah is with regard to the Zman HaTekiyos. Ilu b'Yovel, this is Rav Shesh's kasha on Rav Huna. Tokim bein b'Zman shebezdin yoshv, ubein shelo b'Zman bezdin yoshv. Whereas on Rosh Hashanah, b'Zman shebezdin in, then we'll blow the shofar. Shelo b'Zman bezdin lo. They would not blow the shofar in the afternoon. So Rav Sheshet summarizes his kasha. Ketani mias, we see from this price, so that the Yovel, they would blow bein bisman bezdin, bein chelo, bisman bezdin. And that was the advantage of blowing the shofar on Yovel as opposed to Rosh Hashanah. And that's against Rav Huna, because Rav Huna holds that in Yovel they would only blow bisman shebezdin yoshvin. Not like the first Lishna of Rav Huna that requires that the Bezdin actually sit there, but we still need the Zman Bezdin. So Gemara rejects this and says, Lo, Li Olam Bizman Bezdin. We can support Rav Huna, and in Yovel they will only blow the shofar Bizman Bezdin in the morning hours. And when we talk about the advantage of Yovel over Rosh Hashanah, as far as where they would blow, the Yovel Bizman Bezdin, they would only blow at the time that Bezdin would sit. That means during the morning hours, like we saw in Rav Huna. But Token Bein Bifnei Bezdin, Bein Shalom Bifnei Bezdin. You did not require that the Bezdin actually be present to oversee the blowing of the shofar and supervise it, make sure there was no violation of Yom Kippur and so forth. But on Rosh Hashanah, Token Bizman Bezdin, Ubifnei Bezdin. So both in the case of Yovel and Rosh Hashanah, according to this final conclusion of the Gemara, you require Zman Bezdin. The advantage of Yavne, of Yerushalayim over Yavne, the advantage of Yovel over Rosh Hashanah is that with regard to Yovel, all you need was Zman Bezdin. With regard to Rosh Hashanah, Shechalias B'Shabbos, it's not enough that it's Zman Bezdin, you also need Bifnei Bezdin. Itvar Nami, and we also have a brisa to support Rav Huna, Rav Chia Bar Gamda, Rav Yossi Ben Shol, Rebbe Ein Token. We don't blow the shofar on Yovel, Kol Zman Shebezdin Yoshvi. Then you're allowed to blow the shofar anywhere in the city. As long as it's Zman Bezdin Yoshvi, you don't need Bifnei Bezdin. But the implication would be that in Rosh Hashanah, there you need Bifnei Bezdin. Boy, Rabbi Zera, Ninaru La'amod Velo Amdu Mal. What happens if the Dayanim made a decision that they are going to relocate themselves? And the word Ninaru means that they already started moving, but they didn't actually move out. They're preparing themselves to stand up and relocate. So it's not going to be a Mokom Shebez and Yosh. But Adain Lo Omdu, they didn't yet pack up their beds. Wow. And the Gemara analyzes this up. Bezdin Yoshvin Be'inon Va'ika. If you need that Bezdin are still there, present, well, right now they're still present. They're sitting there. Oh, Dilma, shall we say no? We need a Zman Bezdin Be'inon. We need that they sit down during this period of time in order to judge for lek. That condition has not been fulfilled because they're already on the way out. The Gemara leaves us as an open-ended question. The Mishnah says, V'od zos haisa Yerushalayim Yisera al Yav, that any city that saw and heard from close proximity to Yerushalayim could come and blow, whereas in Yavne they only blew in the Bezdin. And the Gemara now analyzes. There are 4 conditions necessary to allow a proximate city to Yerushalayim to blow the shofar on Shabbos and Rosh Hashanah. Number 1, Roeh, Prat le Yosheves B'Nachal. You have a city that's all the way down in a valley, and it cannot see Yerushalayim. Shomas, they could hear the shofar. Prat le Yosheves B'Rosh Ha'ar, a city that's all the way up on a mountain, from which they have a vantage point. They can see Yerushalayim, but they can't hear the tkiyos. Krova, it has to be a city that's close. Prat li Yosheves Chutz L'Tchum, it's got to be within 2,000 am of Yerushalayim. Yechol Lavo, and you can come into Yerushalayim on that day of Rosh Hashanah, which is Shabbos. Prat lemafsik lo nahara. But if they have a river that separates the city from Yerushalayim, there's no bridge over the river, and we don't take a boat on Shabbos, is therefore, even though it's within 2,000 amma, nevertheless, since it's Ein Yechol Lavo, you don't blow the shofar. Mishnah is going to explain certain takonos that were established by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Barishona, at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, Lulav Nitol B'Mikdash Shiva. The Torah says, "Usmachtem Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem Shivas Yomim," and Lifnei Hashem Elokeichem means in the Azor in the Mikdash, and that's when they took the 4 minim on a daily basis in the Mikdash. Remember, Medina, outside of the Mikdash, like for example the city of Yerushalayim or any other city in the state of Israel, then it would be taken Yom Echad. They only took the lulav on the first day of Yom Tov, because the Torah says, "Lukatim l'chem Yom HaRishon." But Mishachar Beis Hamikdash, Hiskin, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shei lulav nitol b'Medina Shiva. That just like in the Mikdash, when the Mikdash stood, they would take the lulav every single day of the 7 days of Sukkot. So too, after the Churban Beis Hamikdash, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that we take the Daled Minim everywhere for 7 days. And why? Zecher LeMikdash. So we should imagine ourselves as if we were in the Beis Hamikdash. Another takana, which was established by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, is Sheyehei Yom HaNeif Hulo also. Yom HaNeif is the 16th of Nisan, the day in which, when the Mikdash stood, they brought the Omer to be Matir Chadash. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that we don't, now that the Mikdash is no longer in existence and we don't have the Omer that's brought in the Mikdash, and according to Torah law, you'd be allowed to eat Ben HaChadash immediately with daybreak on the 16th of Nisan, and for some reason, which the Gemara is going to analyze, Rabbi Yochanan establishes that we have to wait until the end of the day in order to eat the Chad. Gemara asks me, Nolan Tavdina and Seichel Mikdash. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that we take the lulav for 7 days as a Zeichel Mikdash. Where do we know, from whence do we derive the conclusion that we should be making a Zeichel Mikdash? The Omar Kra, the pasuk says in Yirmiyah, Ki ale arucha loch Umimakosayich erpa'ech, Niyum Hashem, Kinidocha karuloch, Sion hi doresh ema. This is divrei nechama for Sion from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that down the line in the future, he will replace, or not replace, he will bring back the original state of Laos La Rucha Marpe B'chila. No, it's even though the nations of the world are calling us Nidacha, as if we were expelled from the land, and they're saying, well, there's no one here to really Doresh, to look after the shalom of Yerushalayim, of Eretz Yisrael and Sion, but that's not going to happen, because Rosh Baruch Hu is going to bring in all the ingathering of all the exiles, and it says here, Doresh Einla, that during a period of time of Nidacha, when we're in Golus, is Doresh Einla. Michlal, we can infer from this, the Ba'id Risha, that we should be Doresh Sion. How we Doresh Sion? By creating a Zikaron, which is called Zeichel HaMikdash. So we have the mitzvah Morar, which is Zeichel HaMikdash, and Spheres HaOmer. Maybe Afikomen is Zeichel HaMikdash. We have all sorts of experiences that remind us of the Mikdash. That's called being Dorish Tziyah. Mishnah says, Hey Yom Henef Kulo. Also, the entire 16th of Nisan is also, and you can't eat the Chodesh my time. What was the motivation of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? And the answer is, Mehera Yibane Beis HaMikdash. We're hoping that next year the Beis HaMikdash will be standing, will be rebuilt. And Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai is afraid that if the people get used to the fact that they can eat Min HaChodesh immediately with daybreak on the 16th, Yomru Eshtakei Lo Achalnu Beheir B'Zov. Milo Achalnu, did we not eat from the new Tfuah immediately with the sunrise on the eastern horizon? Is Akshav Nami, now that the Mikdash is restored, Nechel. Why don't we eat immediately with daybreak? Well, the other, they don't realize that there's a fundamental difference. The Eshtakei last year, when there was no Avoda, and they couldn't bring the Omer, Lo Av Yom Hebi Mizach Matir, then the light of day is Matir Achilas Tvu. It's already royal Hakravas Omer. But Hashta, now that the Mikdash stands, the Ika Omer, we have the ability to bring the Omer, is Omer Matir. It's not the day itself that's Matir, but rather bringing the Omer is Matir. And you're not allowed to eat from a Chodesh until after the Omer is brought. And they're going to think, no, with daybreak we're allowed to eat from the Chodesh. So now the Gemara goes through an entire whole analysis as to when we're going to build the Beis HaMikdash. Different scenarios. The Mivnei Amos. When will the Mikdash be built in such a way that Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai is choshesh that people will illegitimately violate the Isur of Chodesh and eat with daybreak? If he's afraid that the Beis HaMikdash will be built on the 16th of Nisan, it's nothing to be afraid of. Why? Harei Heir Mizrach Hitir. In other words, they didn't have a Mizbeach. It wasn't built yet. First, they built the Mikdash. And if, let's say, they built the Mikdash on the 16th of Nisan, it would take them a while until they set up the Mizbeach. And therefore, you don't have to wait till the Omer is brought to be Matir, but rather with daybreak, you're allowed to eat from the new Tfuah. Elo, but rather the Ibane Bechan Mesa, that they'll build the Beis HaMikdash on the 15th of Nisan or earlier than the 15th of Nisan. And then you're not allowed to eat from the new Tfuah, from the Tfuah Chadash and Chodesh until after Hakravas HaOmer. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai instituted an Issa to eat Bizman Hazeh without the Min HaChodesh on the entire day of the 16th of Nisan, so they won't come to Deit Kakol. So the Gemara says in Cain, he shouldn't have prohibited the entire day, but rather he should have allowed us to eat in the afternoon, after the point of midday, because we know from a Mishnah Menachos, as we'll soon see, that the Omer was brought in the morning hours. Dasnan. Harachokim, if let's say you were far from Yerushalayim and you had no idea whether they brought the Omer or not, they would be allowed to eat from the Tuach Hadasha from Chatzos, and they would have every right to assume that by midday the Omer was brought. Why? Lefisha in Bezdin is Atzlum. There's no Atzlus in the Bezdin that oversaw the bringing of the Karbanos in the Beis Hamikdash, so they would certainly guarantee that they would be makriv before the Chatzos Hayom. So why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, even if he was afraid that the Mikdash would be brought and they'll do it this year what they did, they'll do next year what they did this year, he should have been makriv until Chatzos Hayom? More answers, Lo Nitzracha. What's the case there Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is worried about? They built a Beis Hamikdash on the 15th of Nisan, Samuch l'shkia sachama, before the end of the day. So it's close to Shkia Sachama. That's one possibility. Inami, another possibility, the Ibnei B'Laila, or they'll build the Beis Hamikdash on the 16th of Nisan in such a way that they'll still have enough time to build a Mizbeach. And Yesh Lachush, Shelo Yesipek B'Yad HaKohanim L'Hachin Es HaOmer L'Aviu Ad Chatzos Yom Shishasa. Since the Mikdash was built on the 15th, or even more so on the night going into the 16th, there's so much work, malacha, that's mutelas alim, that's imposed upon the Kohanim, that they won't get around to bring the Omer till after Chatzos Hayom. And on that year, you're not allowed to eat from the Tuach Hadosh until after Chatzos Hayom when they bring the Omer. So if people get used to eating the Omer in the afternoon of the 16th of Nisan, they'll do so even after the Mikdash was built, in such a way that the Kohanim are too hassled. They don't have enough time to bring the Omer during the morning hours. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar, he has a different interpretation of the Takana of Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai says that after the Churban Abayis, you're not allowed to eat from the Tuah, from the Chadash, the Tuah Chadasha, during the entire day of the 16th.